Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my next show. I hope you're going to enjoy this show. Tonight's show is a show that is going to be presented. The title of the show is going to be called Israel, Balfour to Rebirth and Beyond. On tonight's show we have two women. The first woman is Maria Holquins. I think that's how you pronounce her name, Holquins or Holquins. She is the host of a show in Sweden. I'm obviously broadcasting this from England and presenting this material from my home studio in England. And so obviously I'm introducing the material that has been provided for me. The original footage of this material is 1 hour 39 minutes. I have subsequently just included in this show just the first 55 minutes. The interviewer, or the host on the show, Maria Hawkins, will be interviewing Christina Toledano Olsbrink. I think that's how you pronounce her name. And the subject tonight, as I have said, is Balfour to the rebirth of the nation-state of Israel and beyond. In tonight's show we will cover material such as the Balfour Declaration, General Allenby, and the British Mandate, the League of Nations, United Nations, and the rebirth of the nation-state of Israel and its subsequent problems that it's had with its Arab neighbours and with regards to the United Nations and their interference in Middle Eastern affairs. I really do hope that you enjoy this show. I've enjoyed putting it together. I have found it informative and above all also quite entertaining in a political sense. Thank you very much.
Welcome to our program. Welcome Christina Toledano Åsbrink again to Sweden.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you have a lot to tell us about history of Israel, but also of the tour. You have been in Sweden some last time.
Yes.
And I want to that you are explaining for the viewers the history of Israel, like they didn't know anything from the beginning.
Okay. So I'm here on a tour of, I've been to 5 major Swedish cities, giving a lecture in each and every one about the legal aspects of Israel and in the Swedish Parliament. And the reactions are good. They're actually overwhelming. People are very thankful and pleased, and it's like, yes, I knew it was something. It's just a type of information that they've been getting. It's completely, it's based on a layer of lies that are slowly but surely seeping into the mind of the everyday person, and the lie is slowly becoming the truth. Yeah. And that's the reason I'm here, because as a Swede and an Israeli, I just see this gap of information that needs to be filled with proper information.
I forgot to ask you, you are born here in Sweden, your background, how did it come that you get to Israel?
Yes, I'm born in Sweden, actually here in Stockholm. Went traveling in the 80s, as young people did, still do. And my travels ended in Israel. And so I stayed. I met my husband, my future husband, and today we have our family there, 3 children, 2 grandchildren.
Nice.
Yes.
Can you start from the beginning, and that everybody, the children or adults in Sweden, can understand what was, because the history books in school didn't give the right picture of Israel.
Okay. So if we have to go back, and of course that is, so you have to go back. You cannot start talking about Israel without ignoring the, not without ignoring. You can't talk about Israel and ignore history. Israel's history is closely linked to the history of the other countries around our neighbors.
Yeah.
And you can say that it started with the First World War, the end of the First World War, the fall of empires, and when it comes to Israel, it's the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which was the ruler of that area, in which Palestine was an area in the southern periphery of that empire, a neglected area, I should say, had been so for some time. The Ottomans ruled for 400 years. And when it's clear during the First World War that the Ottoman Empire is going to fall apart, you have this area that is full of people and languages and cultures that are going to be without a ruler. So after the First World War, the League of Nations is created by the winning part, by the Allied parties in the war, and what they do, they set up a mandate system to make the people in the Ottoman area help become independent. Now, it's not only the Middle East that gets a lot of mandates. You have mandates in Africa, you have mandates in Asia, you have mandates in the islands in the Pacific. So the mandates are the mandate for Palestine is one of many, many mandates. And they are set up at the same time. And when it comes to Israel, the mandates are legalized in San Remo in 1920. Now, what happens when it comes to Palestine, and what makes it so different from the others, is that it was to be a place for Jews of the world where they could find refuge, where they could live in peace, and they could live without fear of being persecuted, killed, murdered, have their property stolen, etc. So this was the British mandate. Now the French and the British, they were they got hold of the Middle East. So Syria was under the French mandate. Mesopotamia was under the British, became Iraq. In the beginning also, the mandate for Palestine included what we today know as the Kingdom of Jordan. And what happens is that when the Jews as an organization, and Zionism is kind of new in its beginning, Zionism together with socialism and communism and all the different isms of the world, they're born at the same time. The Zionist organization, and Zionism, by the way, is the wish, the Jewish wish for a country for the Jewish people. It's not, it's been accused of in UN resolutions for being racist, Zionism. So for 20 years, according to the UN, Zionism was racist, but Zionism is simply the wish for Jews to have somewhere safe to live. And Israel is many times accused of stealing land, yes, grabbing land, colonializing the Middle East, stealing land from Arabs and so forth. That's simply not true. The Jews who were in Palestine, they were either native to the area, as were the Arabs, or the Jews who came there, they had bought land, paid for it, by Arab landowners. And no one stole anything. I mean, they were not enough Jews to dare to steal anything. Every single piece of land they owned, they had bought from someone. And many times that land was wasteland, because it was land that the Arabs didn't want. They didn't know how to farm it. It was marshland, infested with malaria. Yeah. It was desert. It was just land that they did not want. And they sold it to the Jews, who happily bought it.
But here in Sweden, always talk about occupied land to give him back.
Okay, so that's not true at all. And anyone who says occupied land, even today, it's not true. And the reason is that when the Jewish organization sees this opportunity to sort of ask for a piece of land, not asking for a piece of land, asking to come back to a piece of land, they write to the British government in 1917. First World War is still going strong, but they know that the Ottomans are losing out. And they ask the British if they would support the idea of creating one mandate for the Jewish people. And the Brits who replied to this letter, it's Lord Balfour, who is then Foreign Minister of the British government. He answers this letter where he says, well, we see upon this wish with as a positive thought, and we will help to establish such a country, and we will encourage Jewish immigration to this area under the condition that you do not discriminate against the other native population that you have. Because you had Jewish native population, and you had Christian population native to the land, as well as Muslim and others. Yeah. And the condition was that you wouldn't discriminate against those. And of course, that is a condition that we keep until today. This letter, this response letter to the Zionist organization is called the Balfour Declaration. This is incorporated into the mandate. So when the mandate is legalized in San Remo in April, San Remo 1920s, the British mandate for Mesopotamia is legalized. The British mandate for eventually also for the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Transjordan, is legalized. The French mandate for Syria, later on even for Lebanon, are legalized. So you want to talk about occupation? So far there is no occupation whatsoever. So these mandates, they come into being, and they are still legal till today. What happens is that when the Arabs in the area, they see the British mandate looking like it does, they protest this. They don't want to have Jews being any type of ruler over any type of land. And in order to understand the thought behind this, you have to set your mind into the Middle Eastern mind, and you have to understand that Jews have been accepted in the Middle East during different periods, more or less, often less, and they have always been discriminated against. Yemen is an appalling example of how Jews were discriminated against. And the idea that a Jew would rule over a Muslim is completely and utterly unacceptable. And this is the reason they complain to the new organization, the League of Nations, and they complain to the British Empire. And something else that we must understand about the British Empire is that there is oil to be found in the Middle East, and most of that oil at that period of time was in Mesopotamia, Kirkuk and Mosul. So the Brits wanted to sort of please the Arabs. They didn't want to have too much of a conflict with the Arabs. So they agreed to take the original British mandate for Palestine, cut it into, take away 70%, leave 30% for the Jews, and only 30% for the Jews. The other 70% was made into Transjordan. And I'm going to be very rude, and I'm going to say, and it was Judenrein. That's the German word Hitler used when he said he's going to cleanse Europe of Jews and make it Jew-free, Judenrein. What does that mean? It means that no Jews were allowed to live, or buy land in Jordan. Not a single one. And this happened in 1923. Now, what is very important to understand, because we hear this occupied territory, is that it was legally binding. So even if we had San Remo in 1920, in 1923 there is a different outlook of Israel, and it looks the way it looks today.
It's important to see the map, how big it was before and how much they cut off.
Yes. So in 1923 the Jews are left with 30% of the original mandate, which is legal, okay? What happens is that the Brits, they've signed the mandate. It was given to them by the League of Nations. It's like a contract. It was a treaty. So they were supposed to encourage Jewish immigration to the mandate, and that was what was so different with the mandate for Palestine, because most of the Jews didn't really live there yet. They were to come and respect the native population. Remember, they were not to in any way, shape or form discriminate against these people. What the British do is they immediately restrict Jewish immigration. And the only reason they do that is to appease the Arab side. They broke their contract.
It happened only to Israel.
Only to Israel. And it happened only to the Jewish population, because there were no restrictions on Arab immigration. Now you might wonder, okay, so here you have this to-be Jewish state. The Arabs protested. And when I say the Arabs, I call them the Arabs because it's the people inside the mandate border, and it's also the people outside of the mandate border. And most of these Arab countries, they became independent during the 30s and the 40s. So the big winners are the Arabs, because they got loads of countries. Until the mandate period, they had never been independent. They had never ruled over themselves. They had been subjects in an empire, be it the Ottoman Empire, be it the Mamluk Empire, be it the Crusader Empire or the Ayyub Empire. They had Roman Empire. They had never been independent. So when they talk about, today the Palestinian side talk about the catastrophe and the Nakba, that's simply not true. The catastrophe was for us Israelis that they did not accept the Balfour Declaration, that they did not accept the mandate for Palestine, because if they would have done that, 6 million Jews would not have perished under Hitler.
Yes.
That is a catastrophe. That is a Jewish cry of pain, but that is never being expressed. So when it comes to the immigration, so of course Jews immigrated. I mean, they had quotas that they could fill, but there were no restrictions whatsoever on Arab immigration. And the result is that in 1922, when you have 84,000 Jews and 650,000 Arabs, 23 years later, in 1945, you have 1,700,000 plus people living in the Mandate of Palestine, and only 500,000 of those are Jews. So actually you had more Arab immigration than you had Jewish immigration to the Jewish mandate, the Jewish country to be, that was to be Israel.
Why did the Arabs come to the Jewish country?
Well, so the Jews come to this area en masse, and with them they bring work opportunities. They dry out the swampy areas. They make it land for agriculture. They bring high tech at the time, from that period of time. They bring medicine. An Arab Muslim at that time would live for 37 years.
Very short, yes.
That's very short. Within 12 years, it's 49 rather than 37. Infant mortality goes down from 20% among the Arab population, from 20 to 10. Work opportunities bloom. The non-Jewish population of Haifa rises within a few years with 300%. 300.
Yes, a lot.
So the British, who all the time they get these complaints from the Arab side, no, you cannot have this Jewish state. You have to, we are being discriminated and so forth. So the British they go, we don't understand how there can be any kind of discrimination when there's this huge rise in the Arab population, and the salaries they have in the Jewish area is so much more than in their own areas of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, whatever. So lots of Arabs come during this period of time because they want to come.
And then, after?
And then, after the Second World War, of course, the League of Nations, they completely failed. And what all the mandates and all the legal matters that were still sort of open within the League of Nations were given to the new organization, the United Nations. They inherited that. So to say today, which is what some people say, oh no, it's not relevant anymore for Israel because the League of Nations doesn't exist anymore, and with them died the mandates. That's not true at all. United Nations inherited the mandate for Palestine as other mandates as well. And because of all the internal problems, I mean, this is a period between 1920 and 1947 where the Arabs, every now and then, they sort of go berserk, and they kill Jews and they attack them, and there are uprisings, and there are all kinds of terrible things happening. So the British, they send a UN team to check out what's going on there.
But can you explain why after the war the refugees from the Europe, Jewish, must stay on the Cypre?
Okay. In Cyprus?
Cypre.
Yeah. Well, so the British, as I said, they restricted Jewish, which is, they actually breached their own contract. So if we're talking about not legal, that was not legal.
Yeah.
And it's still not legal. So what they do is, during 1939 and 1947, they completely restrict the Jewish immigration to Palestine. So what does that mean? That means that all the Jews in Europe have nowhere to go, because America also closes its doors eventually for immigration, and 6 million Jews perish under Hitler or during the war, because the simple reason they couldn't come to Palestine. They were not allowed. And out of this we have, after the war, still the Brits do not let the Holocaust survivors to enter Palestine. And the ones who do, they are illegal immigrants. Also during the Second World War, the Jews that did come to Palestine, they were smuggled in. And they were classified illegal, which is because the Brits sort of restricted immigration. The worst example of what the Brits did was that there's a boat with refugees, survivors from the Holocaust. It arrives eventually it arrives in Israel or Palestine, and it's sent back to Hamburg, to Germany. That is so appalling. I really have, I'm out of words. I don't know what to say. And of course, the Jews in Palestine, they were, as you must understand, completely against the British people running the mandate, which is the reason that the Jews were also fighting against the Brits in Palestine. So, end of Second World War. Now there is a new organization that has the legal obligations to take care of the mandate, which is the United Nations of today. And what they do is they sent this delegation, give it the name UNSCOP, United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, in 1947. And UNSCOP travels around Israel or Palestine, and they come up with a brilliant idea. Let's cut the land into two pieces again. And the result was that the Jews got 18% of the original mandate, and the other 82% were given to the Arabs. Now, the division of this second time, it's actually the third time, but let's call it the second time, this division was given the resolution number 181, resolution 181. Now you will hear this resolution today as being referred to as from the Palestinian side. We want to go back to resolution 181. Now, in order for a resolution to become any kind of legally binding on anyone, the parties involved have to accept it to begin with. Then it might become legal. When a resolution is a suggestion, yes, until it becomes one way or another legal. So in 1947, 29th of November, the Jews in Palestine go out on the streets in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Jaffa, and they celebrate this. They are happy to take 18% of the original Jewish mandate. The Arab side, the next day, attack the Jews. And this attack lasts for 6 months, and we have what we call in Israel the civil war. And it's a civil war between, now it's outright war, not just a revolt or something. Now it's outright war between the Jewish population and the Arab population. When the British eventually, they get so tired of this mandate for Palestine, they want to give it back to the UN. And in the summer of 1948, Israel should have gotten its independence, as did the countries around in 1946, 1943. What happens is that the British, they plan to leave. They don't want to be part of this. And they set a date. It's kind of secret, but both sides sort of know about it. And that is the reason that Israel proclaims its independence in May of 1948, 14th of May. And when Israel is accused of, we're going back to the legal status of Israel, they just proclaimed, they took independence and they sort of proclaimed it without any kind of basis, and the land didn't have any. That's not true. All they did was proclaimed it a few months ahead of time, because otherwise it would have been a smörgåsbord for all the countries around and all the peoples around to come and grab whatever they could. So Israel proclaims its independence, 19 paragraphs, and I want to talk about three of those paragraphs. Paragraph number 13 says that this country is supposed to be based on justice, peace, equal rights, citizenship for all members. That means the Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, the Druze, the Cherkess, whoever. Paragraph number 16 says, we turn to our Arab citizens and we ask you, please, stop fighting, stop attacking us, stop killing us. Work with us in peace. And together we will lift this country, and you will have, proportionality. You will have a say in the parliament. I mean, you're going to be part of building up this country. And paragraph number 16 turns to the neighbors of Israel and says, we extend our hand in an offering of peace, even though you're doing your best to kill us. And together we will build up the Middle East and make it a better place. And what is the Arab answer? They attack. The next day, it's outright war. And what happens is that this war it goes on from 1948 to 1949, and Resolution 181, well, it fell already in November of 47, because it was accepted only by one side, the Jewish side, and not the Muslim side, or the Arab side, I should say. It became irrelevant. And it's a piece of suggestion that's in the garbage bin, and that's where it still is. It was never legally binding. It has no status today whatsoever. And you cannot come 70 years, after Resolution 181 and said, no, sorry, I started a war, lost it. I want to go back to where it was from before that. You cannot do that. That's not relevant. So this war goes on, and in 1949 there is no peace, but there are armistice agreements, meaning we stop shooting at each other. But they were not borders. They were armistice lines. Now, an armistice line is not a border. It's a temporary line until the sides involved sit down and agree on permanent borders. That didn't happen. And at the end of that war, Israel did not look like the mandate, because the very new country of Jordan had illegally occupied Judea and Samaria, and they called it the West Bank. What's this name, the West Bank? Well, if you're in Jordan, it's the western banks of the River Jordan. And Egypt illegally occupied Gaza. It was never designated to be part of Egypt, as was the Judea and Samaria were never designated to be part of Transjordan, who later on changed its name to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
You have, when you was in Parliament now, you speak about it. How is the reaction?
About the refugees.
These borders.
About the borders. Well, silence. No, I think they were very thankful. Also in Parliament, they were very thankful for this information, and I hope it will not be the first time.
And then after the war, what has happened after this period of time in Israel?
So, well, the war created two refugee crises. The world only knows about one, or talks about one anyway, and that's because it's still going strong. So there was an Arab, and I say Arab, not Palestinian. It was an Arab refugee crisis, and it was a Jewish refugee crisis. 850,000 Jews who had been part of the Arab world for centuries and centuries in Iraq for 2,500 years were thrown out of their respective countries. They were killed. Their property was stolen. Laws were created that made it impossible for Jews to work or make a living in these countries. So 850,000 Jews became refugees. But according to the UN, they were not classified as refugees. And the reason is that they were immediately incorporated into the newborn state of Israel. Newborn. It had just stopped shooting. It wasn't even a year old. And it had just stopped shooting. And so 2/3 of these 850,000 people came and were accepted into the new state of Israel. And as they became citizens, they weren't refugees, no refugee status, no help from the UN. And the other third was dispersed. Mainly they went to United States of America, but they also went elsewhere. So they were incorporated into some country. Between 500,000 to 750,000 Arab refugees out of the mandate for Palestine, out of Israel, let's call it from now on Israel, became a problem because they were never incorporated into anything. Now, what happened with these refugees? And why were they refugees? Well, for a few reasons. First of all, of course, the Israeli army threw some of them out because in a state of war, when you try to kill me, I will defend myself, which is, by the way, legal. That's the way it goes in war. If you attack me and try to kill me, yes. I can legally, I have the right, with the law behind me, to defend myself. So some of the Arabs were, of course, deported this way. Most of the Arabs were encouraged by their own Arab leaders to lock their houses, take the key with them, and come back within a few weeks, because within a few weeks we have sort of finished the Jewish problem. We're going to throw them out, kill them, whatever, and you can come back to your house and it's going to be there. Of course, this didn't happen. So today we have all these people with keys running around saying, I need to get back to my house. That doesn't exist anymore. Now, so where does it become a problem? After World War II, there were millions of people being refugees. And you never heard about 12 million German-speaking people who became refugees. 12 million! And I'm only talking about the German-speaking people who became refugees after the Second World War because they didn't want to live in communist-occupied Eastern Europe. So what happened with them? Well, they were incorporated into the countries, 12 million people. And by the end of 50s and beginning of 60s, they did not exist as a group of people being refugees. So how does at the most, 750,000 people become the world problem when it comes to refugees? Today there are 5.5 million. Because someone wants them to be the problem, someone wants them to live in misery, and someone is making either a political career or a lot of money on this problem. And most importantly, this way we can make Israel the bad guy forever. So these people were set up in refugee camps in the countries around Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, in the illegally occupied areas of Judea and Samaria, in the illegally occupied areas of Gaza by Egypt and Jordan respectively. And a special a special UN organization was created for these people. UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Now there is already an organization that takes care of refugees, UNHCR. In 2015, UNHCR was responsible for 60 million refugees. Today it's more. 60 million refugees. They have 10,000 people working for them, employees.
Yeah.
UNRWA is responsible for 5.5 million people who are classified as refugees. They have 30,000 people employed. And the amount of money, I always get mixed up about how many zeros there are, so I'm not going to go into that, but it's the amount of money the Palestinian refugees, because they became known later on as Palestinian refugees, the amount of money they have gotten, especially since the Oslo agreements in the 1990s, is many, many, many times more than Europe got in the Marshall Plan to build up Europe after the Second World War. So now I say many, many. It's, some people say 16, others say 25 times more. Regardless of the number, the sum is enormous. And with all that money, I should today be able to go on a luxury holiday and spend it on the Gaza beaches and go and play in their beautiful casinos and their fantastic hotels with an infrastructure that is kind of outstanding and high-tech and whatnot. And what do we have? We have no organized sewage system. Electricity is, if it is at all, sparse. The water, they haven't even organized proper water to its citizens. Fields are still being plowed with the donkey. And you still have the kid standing on the street with a stone in his hand. Why on earth have nothing happened there for 70 years? And why is no one today asking that question? Where did all the money go?
But it's changing a little bit.
Changing a little bit. We need some information.
Yes.
So legally, when it comes to the legal status of Israel, between 1949 and 1967, which is the big next sort of step, is that Jordan is illegally occupying Judea and Samaria. Egypt is illegally occupying Gaza. And during this period of time, not a single Arab living in those areas is screaming for independence. No one wants to be a free state because they're under Jordan and they're under Egypt, and you don't just want freedom from Jordan and Egypt. You wouldn't dare do it. What does happen is that in 1964, the Arab League meets in Cairo, I think it was Cairo, and they create the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. Now we have to remember the map of Israel, okay? So the map of Israel at this time is without Judea and Samaria, it's without Gaza. So Palestine Liberation Organization, what Palestine precisely is it that they want to liberate? Well, it's Israel. And anyone who thinks differently or says differently, well, the first person doesn't know and the second one is lying. Because Palestine, for the Arab side, that is Israel. Today it's often referred to as the Zionist entity, but Palestine Liberation Organization wants to liberate Israel, or liberate Palestine from the Israelis and make it into Arab land. So regardless of how many times Yasser Arafat, the terrorist of the world who got Nobel Peace Prize, promised to make changes in his declaration, in his organization declaration, he never did. The only time they sort of make a little bit of a change is in 1968, after the Six-Day War, but it still wants the destruction of Israel. It still wants to be it will accept Jews under very, very specific conditions. But you have to fight the jihad. That's part of every Palestinian is obliged. They don't ask them, you're obliged to fight the jihad against the Jews. So that is how it still stands. That is, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, completely illegal. And the next step that happens is the 1967 war. So in 1967, the Arab countries, they sort of gather against Israel. They throw out the UN, who is taking care of the Sinai border. They simply tell them, leave, and the UN does what the UN does very well. It leaves. And it's free for all the Arab armies around, millions of people, to just go in and attack the state of Israel. Now, many times Israel is being accused of, oh, but you started the war. No, Israel did not start the war. Legally, what happened is that Israel has this diplomatic hotline between Jerusalem and Washington, where Israeli diplomats are traveling back and forth like, I don't know what, like migrating birds. And they're asking for help. They're asking, please help us. We have to sort of, don't you see what's going on? It has to be stopped. The answer to that in the UN and in America, who's Israel's biggest ally, is we do nothing. And Israel knew, of course, what was going to be the result of that. But the actual act that makes a war declaration is done by Egypt when it illegally closes off the Straits of Tiran, which is where Israeli ships have to go if they want to travel to Eilat, which is one of our major ports. Now, to close off access to a port, whether it's an airport or a physical boat port, is in legal terms called a casus belli, reason for war. So, if we want to be specific of who started the war, Egypt started the war. But of course, all the Arab armies started the war. Now, they had this dream of a pan-Arabic big country where Abdel Gamal Nasser, the president of Egypt, actually saw himself as the big leader. And he was probably the person who pushed this war more than any other Arab leader. The result of the Six-Day War is complete and total failure on the Arab side. And personally, this is not legal, this is personally, I believe that Israel will never be forgiven for that victory, because we crushed Arab honor completely. And we are one country in the Middle East, and in the Middle East, you don't walk around crushing someone's honor without paying a heavy price. And I think the price that Israel is paying, we are paying it still. I think we're going to pay it for a long, long period of time in the future as well. Israel immediately turns to the Arabs and says, please, take it back. We're giving it back to you. Every single square centimeter of land that we took in a legal war of defense, just give us peace. Now, they even offered the Judea and Samaria, they even offered Gaza, and these areas were illegally occupied by Jordan and Egypt. They even offered that back.
But they didn't want to.
They definitely didn't want. The Arab League met in Khartoum, and it came up with something that is, if we study history, it's known as the 3 no's. They came up with the following: no, we don't recognize Israel. No, there is no negotiation with Israel. No, there is no peace with Israel. And if you want to talk about clarity, or you think the conflict is complicated, I think that's fairly clear. There are 3 no's that cannot be misunderstood.
No, Christina, how can you explain what's happened after the 6 days war?
So the war ended with another armistice lines, and the UN came up with what we call resolution, or what they call resolution 242. And the reason that's important is because this resolution is many times referred to today, and we hear it in arguments. We need to go back to resolution 242. Israel is breaking that resolution and so forth. So resolution 242 says this: Israel has to give back territories it has occupied. And I cannot emphasize the importance of leaving out the specific article, the. It doesn't say Israel has to give back the territories. It says Israel has to give back territories. Now, Israel has done that. It has given back territories, and thereby it has applied Resolution 242. Now, another thing that Resolution 242 says, and it also has the right to have safe and secure borders. Because after the 6-day war, Israel is 2.5 times bigger than it was before. It included the Sinai, we took back, which we occupied. It wasn't us to begin with, ours to begin with. Gaza, Judea and Samaria is reclaimed, retaken. The Golan Heights are occupied. Now people say illegally, and I say no. Because in a war of aggression, which is what the Arabs started, you have the right to defend yourself. Now, if you need to defend yourself in such a manner as you have to take a piece of land in order to be safe, that is legal. Even warfare has laws and rules. And of course, Israel offered the Arabs back everything, and the Arabs answered with saying, no, we don't want even to recognize your existence. So when we talk about illegally occupied, no, it's not illegally occupied. It was taken, yes, occupied. Now when it comes to Judea and Samaria and Gaza, okay, there is a law called Uti Possidetis Juris. It's an old Roman law. It's a law that countries use today when new countries are being made, and if we take Europe as an example, former Yugoslavia, when Yugoslavia fell apart and broke into pieces, new states were created. Today we have Bosnia, we have Croatia, and Serbia, and so forth. So how do you create these states? Just like that? No, of course there are rules. So, Uti Possidetis Juris says this. When there is first of all, this law is to avoid terra nullius, meaning no man's land, because you don't want to have no man's land anywhere. No man's land is a potential for everlasting conflict that someone or many people or countries will say belongs to me, belongs to me. So in order to avoid that, you practice Uti Possidetis Juris, and it says, in order to draw the line here, to draw the border, you have to go back to the last legal entity that existed in this piece of land. Now, it's not asking you, this law is not asking you, do you like it? It's not asking you, is it politically correct? It's not asking you, is it fair? It's a law. Now, for some people it's fair, and for others they will say, no, it's not fair. But that is the law. The last legal entity when it comes to Judea and Samaria and Gaza was the British mandate for Palestine. So the British mandate for Palestine included those, it was all there. So to say that Judea and Samaria are occupied is completely wrong. And to say that it's illegally occupied, that's completely wrong times two. And today, you can read illegally occupied Palestinian areas. So out of 4 words, 3 of them are completely wrong. They are even false. It's a lie. It's not true. And if you use that phrase, but if you want to use words like that, vocabulary like that when you talk about Israel, you are actually hurting a lot of people, and for a lot of people they will hear this again and again and again.
And they believe them.
And of course they will believe eventually the lie, and the lie will become the truth. So it's about time we start talking about the truth. So Resolution 242, Israel is not breaking that resolution, and Uti Posidetis Juris is making it clear that Judea and Samaria and Gaza are not occupied by Israel at all.
Thank you. We need that. So every time they are saying that, we take it.
Yes, you have to think in terms of
Yes.
Uti Posidetis Juris.
Yes, yes. And I think about after this 6 days war, it's happened a lot of attacks from, they have problem in Israel with, how you said,
Terrorist organization.
yes,
Terrorist?
yes.
Terrorism in
Yes.
general?
Yeah.
Yes, so we have, well, one way of leading this war is by creating the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. And they did their best to terrorize Israel, and they're still going strong, I would say.
It was a time when they exploded buses and they...
Oh, yes. So during the 1990s, now back a bit, 1979, after the Yom Kippur War, which I didn't mention, but in 1979, Anwar Sadat, the Arab leader of Egypt, took a brave step, and I say brave, to make peace with Israel. And it's brave because in the Arab world, to make peace with Israel, to even talk about Israel as Israel, is you put your life on the line. And he did. And he paid for it with his life in 1981 when he was killed for this. So Egypt makes peace with Israel. And today we have a recognized border. It's not a line, it's a border. And we have trade. I mean, we trade with each other. Tourists can go in and out of it. It's not a love story, but it doesn't have to be a love story.
Thank you, Kiki.
Thank you.
I think we are see each other in 1 year when you are coming back to Sweden. So we see if we can do a new interview then.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, for watching that show. And I thank you for taking time out to be informed about what's actually happening. I found a lot of the subject matter covered in this show very evocative and very thought-provoking. Also, it kind of stirs me up a little bit, if only because of the trouble that Israel has and the bias that the historians and the media junctors have over the issue of Israel. I'm thankful that you've taken the time to watch this. I've enjoyed making this, and I hope that I to see you in a further show. Thank you very much, and good night.